Given the content on my channel, especially recently, one may assume that my absolute favourite Universal monster movie was Dracula back in the day. While that movie was definitely up there, I actually preferred Universal's Frankenstein, which came out in the same year funnily enough. I don't really know why I liked it so much, maybe it was the monster makeup or just the gloomy castle vibes. Either way, I thought it was cool. Neither of the films are too accurate to their books unfortunately, but they were incredibly significant for filmmaking at the time. Although it's more known by its title, Frankenstein's subtitle is the modern Prometheus, after the figure in Greek mythology, and this is also where the title for the episode I'm reviewing today comes from. The X-Files is a science fiction drama series that originally ran from 1993 to 2002, one of the main stars of which has appeared in a movie review of mine before. I really love the show, particularly the earlier seasons, and I'd really like to review TV shows on the channel more frequently as I think there are a lot of good spooky shows out there. A few months ago, I asked if you guys would be interested in me reviewing any episodes of The X-Files, and the majority's response was yes, so I looked up its most highly reviewed episodes for me to give my take on, and made another poll based on that. But, is the Post-Modern Prometheus even that good? Let's find out. Without further ado, on with the review.
Polos is life, 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 sleep all night and then Polos is life.
The episode opens with an old school fade-in on a comic book about the Great Mutato, who will look very familiar as the episode progresses. Shayna Berkowitz, a single mother, tells off her son Izzy for going to a comic book convention with his friend, as she doesn't approve of them, although she wishes them well as they drive off. I mentioned the fact that she's a single mother because this will be relevant later. We cut to her in bed, watching Jerry Springer discussing the birth of a child with hypertrichosis in a rather insensitive way, but it is relevant to the events of the episode as we'll come to find out.
Dolores held in her arms a boy with fur like a dog and a hairline like Eddie Munster.
Basically, a shadowy figure enters the house while The Sun Ain't Gonna Shine Anymore by Cher plays in the background. To set the mood, I guess? We then get that classic theme, and we cut to Mulder and Scully. Shayna has written to Mulder, describing the intruder as having a really gross face with lumps all over his head. She reveals that this sort of thing has happened before, and that she gave birth to Izzy after the original incident. Mulder and Scully go to her house to interview her, and she makes a few more unnecessary comments about the baby on Jerry Springer before dropping this bombshell.
Mrs. Berkowitz had a tubal ligation 2 years ago.
The intruder seems to have fried something in the pan, leaving a residue behind, and had a drink. But Shayna's description matches a comic book character that Izzy drew, just as he walks in. Izzy explains that he's seen the Great Mutato himself, and sets out some PB&J sandwiches for him, but Scully is skeptical, as usual.
Is there anything that you don't believe in, Mulder?
Look, I get that she's meant to be the sciencey one, but this is season 5. Surely she'd have learned to listen to Mulder by now. Mutato runs off, and the group chases him, but they end up running into a classic
"You damn kids, get off my property!"
farmer stock character. Funnily enough, he directs them to his son, a spooky, ooky kooky mad scientist stock character, Dr. Pollidori. He mentions using homeotic Hox genes, which are real by the way, in experiments to help further his career and feed his ego. Typical mad scientist stuff really. Essentially, these genes control the pattern of body formation during early embryonic development. Fun fact, Pollidori is actually the name of the author of The Vampyre, the earliest known modern vampire story, which he wrote as part of the same competition that Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein in.
Witness the morphogenesis of Drosophila, the fruit fly. What you are watching has been going on for millennia.
Does anyone else find flies really gross? I don't know, that 1986 film scarred me for life. Long story short, Pollidori has been messing with these genes because he can, in his words, and admits it could theoretically be possible to do this with a human subject. Although Scully tries to reassure him that even if such an experiment was possible, no one would want to, Mulder remains unconvinced. We get this really weird meta-dialogue from Mulder and Scully here, each of which could describe Pollidori and his creation.
But given the power, who could resist the temptation to create life in his own image?
We already have that ability, Mulder. It's called procreation.
It gets even more meta when the scene cuts to Pollidori arguing with his wife Elizabeth, as she wants children and he insists he doesn't, although I guess he does already have one, as we just discussed. The following day, Mulder and Scully find that most of what they discussed the previous night is in the newspaper, as Izzy had recorded it and given it to a reporter. While going through his tape recorder, they come across a recording of Mutato singing along to The Sun Ain't Gonna Shine Anymore, and the scene cuts to him dancing to it risky business style. It's kinda wholesome in a way.
He prefigures the Post-Modern Prometheus.
He said it! He said it!
Wanting to question Dr. Pollidori further, the pair enter his house. Even though it's clearly covered with a fumigation tent, yeah, they don't have such a great time with that.
You're a fucking idiot.
They actually interview Elizabeth, who was attacked in a similar manner to Shayna, although she seems to perk up when Mulder mentions that she might be pregnant. A possible confrontation between Mulder and Pollidori is then cut short by Mulder's clumsiness.
Impregnated? By whom?
Oh, I think you...
Mulder does end up finding some residue in a frying pan and peanut butter in Pollidori's bin though. We then see Mutato watching Mask, a film about a boy named Rocky Dennis, who had craniodiaphyseal dysplasia, and it also stars Cher as his mother. Pollidori's dad then walks in and gives him a PB&J sandwich, calling him son. It's clear that he's the one that's been taking care of Mutato all these years, and we see him looking at a picture book of him and Mutato sadly. Pollidori, the mad scientist, storms into the house. Shayna mentioned earlier that no one in this town locks their doors, see. Through minimal dialogue and simple context clues, Pollidori confronts his father about saving and taking care of Mutato, and the old man gives a pretty fitting response.
Why? Because I can.
Pollidori then has a very reasonable and totally not insane response, as it's heavily suggested, via talkie-style shadows, that he throttles his father to death. When Mulder goes to the cafe in the morning, everyone gives him dirty looks, the chef spits in his food, and the waitress tries to pour hot coffee on him. They're pissed off that the FBI has ruled Mutato a hoax, but Scully is really to blame here. Suddenly, the townspeople form an angry mob and get ready to lynch Izzy for the crime of... being a nerd? I don't know. Thankfully, Shayna has something to say about it. Meanwhile, Scully tells Mulder that the residue found on the frying pans is from an agricultural agent used to anesthetize animals, which leads them to suspect Pollidori Sr. In a sadly ironic cut, Mutato finds Pollidori Sr.'s lifeless body, and buries him in the barn, weeping. Mulder and Scully then find the grave, and hear creaking upstairs, although it's only a reporter. She witnessed the burial, and due to his appearance, she blames Mutato. Just then, the mob reappears with torches and pitchforks, being led by Dr. Pollidori.
What makes you think he's here?
I've seen him with my own eyes.
Mulder and Scully look at each other in complete disbelief, but find a cowering Mutato in the basement of the house. The mob begins breaking in, and Mulder and Scully stand in their way. Mutato speaks, and explains that he was created by Dr. Pollidori 25 years before the events of the episode, and was rescued by Pollidori Sr., whom Mutato calls his father. Wait, this family tree is all kinds of messed up. Pollidori Sr. tried to make a mate for Mutato using farm animal hybrids, and it's suggested that Izzy may be a farm animal hybrid or something. Mutato asks Dr. Pollidori to make a mate for him, but the evil scientist insists it's impossible, and that Mutato was a mistake. This is a reference to the latter half of Mary Shelley's book, and the 1935 sequel to the Universal film, the iconic Bride of Frankenstein. Also, during this scene, there are a few weird zoom-in shots of townspeople intercut with zoom-in shots of the animals. Does this mean that half of the town are animal hybrids? What's going on in this town? Mutato rightfully apologizes to Shayna and Elizabeth, and instead of falsely arresting Mutato, Mulder and Scully arrest Pollidori and take Mutato to a Cher concert. Cher is actually played by celebrity impersonator Tracy Bell here, and we next see Shayna and Elizabeth proudly holding their newborn babies, while being interviewed by Jerry Springer. The episode ends on a shot of Mulder and Scully dancing to Cher's Walking in Memphis, before it transitions into a comic book still. Well, that was an interesting watch. But what do I think of the Post-Modern Prometheus overall? The episode clearly adapts Mary Shelley's novel into the X-Files universe, as it both directly and thematically references the book and its universal adaptations, sometimes a little too directly for my taste.
Good night, Dr. Frankenstein.
The end credits even look like they belong at the end of a Hammer horror film. The episode also uses dramatic lighting, long worm's eye shots, and is entirely shot in black and white to really drive home the era the creators are trying to imitate. I found Cher being such a big addition to the story fun if not quirky. The use of the film Mask did make sense thematically, and Mutato's reference to it during his speech at the end is quite upsetting.
Your books and your records and your home media centers, I learned of the world. And of a mother's love that I'll never know. Cher loved that boy so much.
The placement of some of her songs was almost laughable in parts though. Like one of her songs starts playing as they enter Pollidori's fumigated house. The episode is also scattered with this unusual synth soundtrack that turns into circus music once the angry mob get their torches and pitchforks out. The episode does try to touch on some more sensitive topics, which is typical for the X-Files in its own weird way. For one, the consent around Shayna and Elizabeth's pregnancies are dubious at best. They don't seem too upset about it, especially towards the end, but still. Since Shayna's tubes were tied, I'm going to assume that they had to have been artificially inseminated in some way, or there was some magic wannabe immaculate conception at play here. The episode is weird enough, and I don't really think it needs to get into that level of creepiness. Mutato also didn't ask to be created, nor rejected by his creator, even if he did consider Pollidori Sr., his grandfather if you will, to be his father. Another theme that the X-Files tends to try to discuss in several episodes is how poorly people react to people with physiological conditions. One striking example is how Shayna describes Mutato.
Then the room got all smoky and I saw some kind of monster.
But when the townspeople call Izzy a monster, she says this. Only to then say,
Where is he? Show the world your horrid lumpy face!
When confronting Mutato. It's pretty ironic considering it's heavily implied that the townspeople are all hybrids themselves. As I mentioned in my commentary section, the episode is really meta. Like, really meta. You have the comic book visuals, the fact that the comic book exists within the story, the ironic dialogue, and Mulder keeps talking about the events of the episode as if he knows he's in a story.
Not in this story.
Where's the writer? I'm going to speak to the writer.
As I said, the episode is really weird. I've heard several different theories about the comic book framing in particular, one being that Izzy just made the whole thing up after seeing Mulder being referenced on TV, and another being that the events really happened and he made a new edition of his comic based on the events. It would explain why the story was so strange anyway. Overall, the Post-Modern Prometheus is definitely one of the better X-Files episodes out there in my opinion, with some nice classic horror influences. While it sometimes leans a bit too heavily on its references and raises some uncomfortable questions, it's undeniably memorable. It's a weird, crazy ride that does make for an interesting watch. Well, that's all for this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and as always, thanks for watching.
The blue and green ones are my favorite kind, but I'll eat the colored ones from time to time. Cause Polos is life, 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 Polos is life. Sleep all night